As this chapter again does a disturbing number of disparate things, this will also be slightly longer than usual, I fear. Chapter 2 of Athenaze begins by discussing the first person, second person, and third person singular indicative verb forms. You're going to get the indicative and the imperative. So every verb has person, first, second, and third person, number, singular, plural, and dual, but not in this textbook, so just singular and plural. Person and number, these are combinatorial, so first person singular is I, first person plural is we, second person singular is you, second person plural is y'all, right? So we can interchange all the different moving pieces here. Third person is he, she, it, Steve. Third person plural is they, right? Or Steve and Melissa, right? So two people, multiple people. Or a plural subject, like the people work, right? So a third person plural could refer to a sort of collective noun like that. Okay, so here you're getting your first person, second person, and third person singular verb forms. These are your standard verb forms attached to the stem luo, from the word luo, to loosen. The lexical entry for a verb is the first person singular active indicative, which is what this is. So I loosen, I am loosening. That is a first person, the speaker, is the agent of the action. And that means it's an active verb where the speaker is, an active verb is where the subject is the agent of the action. Singular, first person singular, active, indicative. Active means the subject is the agent, and indicative means we are describing reality. As opposed to imperative, which we're going to learn in a second, which is a command. Your forms here are luo, lues, lue, so o, ace, a are your endings for this kind of noun, or this kind of verb, so we'll learn. This gets a little more complicated, but basically, o, ace, a is your active, indicative, verbal endings. Indicative is what we call a mood, and a mood basically describes the relationship, present active indicative, I was missing tense, present active indicative. The mood describes the relationship to reality, is a sort of way of describing it. So, indicative is the most common mood, but also in this chapter we have the imperative, which is another mood. This doesn't describe reality, but rather turns a verb into a command or an order. We get the word imperator, emperor, or imperious, the English adjective imperious. I'm sure there are other good words, but this makes it into a command. So this is another ending. And notice this is distinctive. So this is your second person singular imperative, active imperative, present active imperative. Just this letter epsilon. So the command spoide means hurry, or phil would be love. They're introducing a complication here, which is that when you add an epsilon to an existing epsilon, as is found on the stem here, you get epsilon iota. This is the sort of thing which most textbooks save for down the road, but you're getting introduced to it here early, so we might as well, despite the fact that there's no real discussion of this, show it to you. The ending is epsilon being added on to a verb, the stem of which ends with an epsilon, so it turns into epsilon iota. That's what we have for now. If you want to negate an imperative, you use this negation may. So you've already encountered the negation, the negative adverb or particle oo, which is for negating indicative verbs. So if you want to say he doesn't hurry, you could say uspoide. But if you want to command someone not to hurry, it has a distinctive negation. May is for negating imperatives, and we'll find out later. It negates some other moods as well, the subjunctive, for instance. Okay, so that's your verbal stuff. That covers your first person, second person, third person singular, present, active, indicative. So every verb has 5 parts: person, number, tense, voice, mood. You should try to memorize them in that order. Everything you're learning for a while here is present. Everything you're learning for a while here is active. And you've now met two moods, the indicative mood and the imperative mood, in three persons, all singular. O, ace, a. I loosen, you loosen, he, she, it loosens. So I recommend you try practicing this. Practice saying philaes, filet, luo, lues, lue. Can't quite get this to show up on the top of... Well, it is what it is. So shrink it. There we go. Philo, philes, phile. Okay, that's your verb stuff. Hopefully you can read the descriptions. The verb to be is irregular, as always, and these forms are unpredictable. So the rules we've learned, O, ace, a, are not going to help you predict how to form the verb to be. Get used to that. So you simply have to memorize these like they were separate vocab entries. Amy, a, Eston. I suggest you create flashcards for these words as if they were distinct vocab words, because unlike luo, lues, lue, philo, philes, phile, you're not going to be able to predict these based on the sort of verbal paradigm, based on the way you change the spelling of verbs. They give you a pronoun. There's a discussion here of accenting. The only thing that's really, let's see, we'll skip to the next page. The only thing about accenting that you might want to keep in mind for now is this, that verbs are, they have what's called recessive accent. So the accent is running away from the end of the word. It's trying to get to the front of the word. So the accent will be on what's called the antepenultimate, which is the third to last, the one before the penultimate. So the third to last syllable. They'll be there if they can, unless there is a long syllable later in the word, in which case they're dragged one towards the ending. So that's what that is discussing. Don't worry about it too much. Take a look. Read it over. The basic idea is verbs have what's called recessive accent, so their accent is running towards the beginning, and long syllables will drag it back from the beginning towards the end of the word. Okay, so hopefully that's easy, because here's the big conceptual hurdle for this chapter, which is you are learning four new cases, I suppose, to become the vocative. Basically, all the other cases. So we've already learned the nominative, which is basically the subject, but also we've encountered predicate nominatives when you're going to equate something with a subject. And we've already learned the accusative for the direct object, the thing which is receiving the action of the verb. Now you're going to learn three more. The genitive case, the dative case, and the accusative case. Now, the genitive case, fundamentally, this is going to differ a little bit from what your textbook says, but trust me on this one. The genitive case, fundamentally, the genitive case proper, the proper genitive case is adjectival. It is a way of modifying a noun, and it is often expressible with the English word of. So the tree, the house of wood, or the man of Syracuse, or it is fundamentally adjectival. It can express relationships. So the brother of mine, the brother of Ian. It can express constitution or being made up of something. So the shelf of wood. It can express possession. The book. These are the books of Ian, right? Now. There's another case in Proto-Indo-European called the ablative, and the ablative is about separation or source. And the ablative has been consumed by the genitive. So there are also ablative uses of the genitive case. So the genitive case will also express source, and these functions are not always adjectival. These functions will express the thing from which something is separated or derived from. And that's the usage they highlight here, which is frustratingly not the primary usage of the genitive, but it's the one they introduce first. So I want you to know that a proper genitive in Proto-Indo-European is adjectival. It is a way of giving more information about a noun. And the proper ablative is source, and both the ablative and the genitive appear in the genitive case in Greek. So the genitive case in Greek can either be a genitive of source, or it can be a genitive of, we'll learn there's a bunch of other ones, but characterization, genitive of constitution, characterization, possession. These are all sort of traditional genitives. So there's the genitive genitives and the ablative genitives. We'll see this is going to happen some more. The dative case is used primarily, they're showing you here with prepositions how to use it, which is a sort of special use cases. But the dative case is primarily indirect object, although we'll learn, so that is the dative use of the dative case. The dative case can be indirect object, so another noun in a sentence that is affected by, benefiting or being affected, perhaps detrimentally affected by the action. So if I'm giving a marker to Steve, the marker is the accusative. I'm acting upon the marker. But Steve is benefiting, or maybe he doesn't want a marker, so it's hurting him. It doesn't really matter if it's good or bad, but he is being affected by the action indirectly. I'm acting upon the marker by giving it to Steve, so Steve would go in the dative case. The dative will also assume other functions. So we'll see that the instrumental case, which is in one of those sort of higher order Proto-Indo-European cases, the instrumental is going to be assumed by datives. So we can also put a noun into the dative to function instrumentally. So those are some of the uses. The genitive can be either a true genitive, which is an adjectival, or it can be a genitive of source, which is called the ablative genitive. Or in the dative can be either a true dative, which is an indirect dative, or an instrumental dative. And we'll learn it gets more complicated yet. But that's a good start. Accusative case here is reintroduced with some prepositions. Note that prepositions in English, words like in, by, to, for, there are prepositions in Greek, and prepositions have special relationships to cases. So they're showing you here that the preposition en, which is in or on, always takes the dative case. The preposition ek always takes the genitive case. And that's true. Preposition pros always takes the accusative case. I think that's true. But as we'll see, sometimes the same preposition will take words in different cases, and the case they're in will decide what that preposition means, will affect the meaning of the preposition. So hold on to that. But for now, they're teaching you prepositions and the cases with which they're paired. The last case you learn is the easiest, and that is the vocative case, which is again, which is another way of changing the spelling of a noun to affect its role in the sentence. And here it is if you are directly addressing that noun. If you want to speak to, here they have an enslaved person, doule. So instead of saying doulos, you say doule. It is this epsilon, and it is a way of doing direct address. So you're conceptually then, you're introduced to those cases, and here are their spellings in the masculine singular of a particular subset of these nouns. Kalos, kalu, kalo, kalon, kale. So you want to memorize those. Agras, agru, agro, agran, agre, if you're directly addressing a field. So pay attention to those, and then definitely memorize the articles. You want to make sure you have these down pat, because these will be your friends. Nouns get more and more complicated. Articles never get more complicated than this. I mean, we have to learn the other genders and the plurals, but there's only one set of articles, even though there's lots of different versions of Greek nouns. So if you learn the articles, they will be a great crutch for when you can't remember the forms of nouns later. So, ho, tu, to, tan. And they're treating o as an article, which is fine. It's a sort of a special, it's not a different article, it's an interjection, like the word o, I guess, in English, or maybe it's like hey. It's not an article, so there it is. But do pay attention to these articles, do memorize these. These are the word the in the different cases. All here masculine on the left side of the column, and on the right column we have the neuter, which are largely the same, but the nominative and the accusative are different, and as in the neuter, the nominative and accusative will always be identical. I don't think that ever changes. So the nominative and the accusative forms will always be indistinguishable, which means to distinguish the nominative from the accusative, you have to use context. You have to use context clues to figure out if this particular noun is being a subject or being the direct object of the verb. Discussion here of accents of nouns. They are persistent, which means they want to stay where you've learned them in the vocab entry. You can read that discussion of accenting. We'll have fuller discussion of accents later in this course. Bunch of information. We've learned first person, second person, third person singular verbs in the present active indicative. We've learned the second person singular imperative, which is just the letter E. Make sure you memorize those. And then we've learned our full noun paradigm for the masculine singular, one of the masculine singulars. And as part of that, we've learned the cases, the nominative, the genitive, the dative, and the accusative. Nominative is subject, genitive is characterization and source, and dative is indirect object and instrument, and accusative is direct object, and vocative is direct address when you are calling somebody's name. Note these spelling changes. Note kappa, alpha, lambda is your stem. Alpha, gamma, rho is your stem. These are endings which are separable. And then some other complications we saw.